Coming up, who are the Nets' top options with the 8th pick in the draft, and which players stand out above the rest? I'll answer all that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And on today's show, I'm joined by an NBA draft analyst to analyze the Nets' most realistic targets at 8 and what direction they should go with the pick. Joining me now is Raphael Barlow, host of Locked On NBA Big Board and writer of NBA Big Board on Substack. How are you, man?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. Congratulations on the new role. So looking forward to this.
Thank you. And, having a draft expert on here is great because if we're talking about fan bases that are needy for all the draft content right now, it is this Nets fan base with 4 first-round picks, their first lottery pick since 2010, a lot of excitement. So let's start from there just in terms of, you're a guy, you have some connections throughout, just any intel, anything you've heard surrounding the Nets, whether it be, prospects that they might be high on. Obviously, there's a lot of trade possibilities, just anything that you've heard.
Nothing too specific, so I know that might be a little bit disappointing, other than they're a team that could possibly move up. They obviously have the options to do a lot of different things and go a lot of different ways. And if there's a player that they really like that they may feel that's out of their range, they probably have the assets to move up. And then I think there's going to be some trades where they could possibly end up getting more picks in this draft just because of the salary situation, and there's some teams that are going to be looking to dump some salary. So Brooklyn is a team that could be a big mover on draft day.
All right, so let's get into, this 8th pick in terms of how your board's shaken out, because it seems like the consensus amongst most people is obviously Cooper Flagg, bona fide number 1 pick. Dylan Harper seems to be the guy at 2. And beyond that, there seems to be some less consensus when you get from that, 3 to 8 to 10 range. So is that kind of how you see this? And how do you have your board shaking out after Harper at 2?
Yeah, the consensus is Harper and Flagg and Harper will go 1 and 2. And then after that, Ace Bailey's the favorite at number 3, but that may not be a lock. And then from there, it's just like it's all in the eyes of the beholder. I do think the top 5 will feature VJ Edgecombe and maybe Tre Johnson. Don't know if it's in that order. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the teams or maybe even 2 of the teams picking in the top 5 decide to move back, because there's some teams that feel like, yeah, there's a guy that I really like and I can move back and get him. And then if I move back and get him, I can get another asset in the same deal. So I think it's going to be a very, very wild draft night. As far as the Nets, the guy that I've kind of been looking at the Nets taking is Noa Essengue from France. I think he's like the ideal swing for the fences prospect. And he's just played so well in the playoffs that I don't even know if he's going to be available at number 8. But he's a guy that I really, really like. And that's kind of been the guy that I think the Nets should target if he's available.
All right, we'll get more into Essengue. Definitely a guy that I've written about and who seems to be really helping his stock with what he's doing over there in the BBL right now in the playoffs. But just, touching on the board one more time, beyond, you said you could see some movement beyond the top 2 picks in terms of 3 to 8, 3 to 10, whatever that range is there. It seems some people I've talked to seem to think that the reason you could see some movement, you said, it's in the eye of the beholder, some of those prospects. A lot of people seem to have, not as huge of a gap between maybe the 3 and 4 and, 8, 9, 10. I think coming into the season, it was Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, or closer to that, tier of Dylan Harper or maybe Cooper Flagg. But now it seems like there's less consensus beyond that. So you see those prospects as all in a similar class, kind of from 3 to where the Nets will be picking?
Yeah, I do. My top 5 is definitely Cooper, Harper, Ace, and Tre is in my top 5. I'm not going with the consensus. I don't know if VJ is a lock in the top 5, but most people seem to think he is. But after that, like I said, it can be anyone. It can be Jeremiah Fears, who I would have ahead of VJ. Who knows? Like I said, it's going to be a crazy draft night, but I think somebody's going to fall. I can't figure out which person it is, but I do think that there is somebody that's going to fall. And I've even heard some people tell me if Ace does not go to Philly at 3, then it could just be a situation where he falls because other teams could be like, wait a minute, was there something wrong? Like why? And so, I keep saying it. I just think it's going to be a wild draft night. I think it's going to be similar to the trade deadline where there was just so much activity and there were so many trades that happened that weren't rumored. And I think we could see that in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, Ace is really interesting because he's a guy obviously coming in. Like there were some people coming into the college season who were like, could this guy challenge Cooper Flagg for the number 1 pick?
I was one.
You got
Sorry
one
about
there.
that, Cooper.
Yeah, but obviously it's shaking out how it is. And now it seems like, I talked to some people at the Combine in Chicago who said they wouldn't be surprised, like you're saying now, if he fell to 8 or if he was, in that range or if he slid a little bit. So there seemed to be a lot of concerns about him, and it really just adds, obviously, the unpredictability of this class. And before we get into, I think we should talk about Noa Essengue, obviously. Somebody that I wanted to talk about was Jeremiah Fears, because I know that I spoke to him at the Combine. I know he met with and worked out for the Nets. I've heard some things that the Nets seem to like, what they saw from him in that regard. But I don't know how realistic it is that he gets them at 8. So he could maybe be a trade-up guy for them, or there is a possibility, that he could fall to 8. Just what do you see from him as a prospect and, him as a potential target for the Nets?
Yeah, I really like him. I think my brother was the first to put him in the top 5 range. I think that was back in December. Caught a lot of flack and a lot of heat for it, but it seems like he could be in that range. I just love the fact that he can get 2 feet in the paint. I think in today's NBA, that's very valuable. A point guard that can pressure the rim. He's also young. I mean, he's supposed to be a senior in high school, just wrapping up his last year of high school. But instead of being in high school, he was playing in the SEC, which was historically, as you just look at the teams that played in the tournament, the best conference in NCAA history. And he averaged 17 a game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, had some big moments, hit a game-winning shot against Michigan. And I know some teams that really like him. I know one team that does not have a pick in the range, but they have him as number 2 on their board. They think that with his upside, they also feel like if he would have did the traditional route, went to college or went to high school this year, and then had another year under his belt, then he'd be even better than what he is right now. And so I've also heard a team say that they think that he has real star power upside. Some are concerned about the shooting, but he shot 85% from the foul line. But for me, I just love the fact that he's tough, he's competitive, and he led Oklahoma to the NCAA tournament as a freshman in a tough conference. And one of the things that really stood out to me was later in the year when they were on the fence or on the bubble to making the conference, his teammates, older guys that are seniors, were like, we're getting out the way, do your thing, young fella, we're going to ride you. He had a big game against Kentucky. They ended up losing that game, but then he gave UConn fits in the NCAA tournament. And to me, that says a lot for an 18-year-old playing a tough position.
Yeah, and he did such a great job, carrying that Oklahoma offense as a guy who could have been, people forget that he reclassified, could have been a senior in high school and was tasked with, carrying an extremely heavy burden there for Oklahoma. And I, spoke with him at the Combine in Chicago, and that confidence that he has on the court when you're talking to him just face to face for a kid who's as young as he is, it really stood out to me. He was a guy who just seemed, had a lot of conviction in everything that he was saying and seemed very sure about himself. And if the Nets spoke with him, I feel like obviously they would have seen that as well. The jump shot is a question, the finishing, some of that stuff at the rim, but the jumper I think is the biggest question, because when you're talking about a guy like him who he's not small, but he's on the smaller side. Like I think he measured like 6'2.5" without shoes. So probably plays 6'3", 6'4", like somewhere around there, a little bit of a slighter frame, but he's young, but that, could lend some concerns about his defensive ceiling. And when you look at guards who, struggles shooting the ball in the NBA and also struggle defensively. That's not really an archetype that you see people, have success with, see teams have success with. So how do you feel about his jump shot overall? And, it seems like it's such a swing skill as it is for a lot of players in this class.
Yeah, I'm actually not concerned about it. Like I mentioned, he shot 85% from the foul line. Now, if it were a situation where he shot 30% from three and 72% from the foul line, I'd have some real concerns. But the touch is there. And that's if you believe free throw shooting is a good indicator of overall touch. And it's usually rare to find a guy that's a guard that's a good free throw shooter that is a poor shooter. So I think over time he's going to develop more consistency, but he makes shots. Like he's a tough shot taker, a tough shot maker. And to me, when he's making those contested mid-range shots and he's having to like create his own offense and shoot pull-up jumpers, and he's making them with a hand in his face, then I think the touch is definitely there. He just has to get better at it. But again, he's young. He's supposed to be in high school. So I have no concerns about the shooting.
Yeah, outside shooting and defense, as I said, seem to, in terms of just that player archetype, those are the things that people are going to be picking at in terms of him. But the defensive end, it seems like he has good instincts. He was a big steals guy, was able to come away with some big plays on that end. And he has maybe a frame where he could come into, build into it a little bit more and maybe have a little bit of a higher upside on that end than people are giving him credit for. But coming up out of the break, we'll dive deeper into some of the prospects and the next could potentially be targeting, particularly Noa Essengue and possibly a few other guys. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Look, guys, it's the summer. Maybe you're going out to eat more. You're hitting a sporting event, going to a concert. All that starts to add up. Monarch Money helps you track your spending and meet your financial goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Coming back from the break, talking with Raphael Barlow of the NBA Big Board podcast on Locked On. And Raphael, you mentioned Noa Essengue as a guy that the Nets could potentially go after, and he's been a hot name within all draft circles, moving up big boards, moving up mock drafts. But Nets fans particularly, I've had an eye on him. There's been a lot of discussion about him. So when you look at what he's been doing this season over with in Germany, what stands out to you about his skill set?
And it's really not even the skill set. I think the skill set has a ways to go. It's just the productivity and the fact that he has a ways to go skill-wise. And that's something that if I'm a NBA front office and I believe in my developmental staff, I'm like, all right, if we can just build on what he already has, then we have something there. I mean, he's a guy that at the beginning of the season, he was 17 years old. 17, think about that. 17 years old. There's a lot of guys that are 17 years old right now that are like sophomores in high school.
Yeah. He's second youngest player in the draft, right? I think he's only 3 days older than Cooper Flagg. So extremely early in the development.
You've done your research. You've done your stuff. I'm impressed.
I've done a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So, and he was a guy that I spoke with his agent. This is about over a year ago, and he had mentioned that he was a preemie. He wasn't even supposed to be born in 2000. Whatever year it was. And so he's supposed to be born in February instead of December. So if he were born just 2 weeks later, he wouldn't even be eligible for this draft. So you look at how young he is, you look at his body still has a ways to go as far as just strength, but somehow he's still getting a bunch of rebounds a game. He had 20 points against the Blazers in a preseason game. He's still getting to the foul line. And I've had a chance to watch him in person a few times. I saw him at Basketball Without Borders All-Star Weekend in Indianapolis in 2024. He was productive. And I just thought, like, man, this guy's skinny. This guy's really skinny. He's filled out a little bit. And then I saw him in a tournament in Dubai. And this is when I really started believing in him. I've known the name for a while, but he had like 33 points and 17 rebounds. And it was just timely cuts, offensive rebounds, steal, transition finish. And he was just filling up the stat sheet, dominating the game without needing the ball to dribble the ball multiple times or without knocking down jump shots. And that's when I start thinking like, all right, if he develops a corner three or if he develops some isolation game, the sky's the limit. And so for him, with him being so young and productive, and his team is playing in the playoffs right now, it's not a situation where he's getting empty calorie stats. And anyone that like really understands European basketball, they don't give young players minutes. That's why there's such an influx of guys coming over from Europe to play college basketball now, because they get an opportunity to play. And for him, he wasn't given minutes. He had to earn them, and he's playing on a team that is playing in the playoffs. And I mean, he's just been really good. So I'm a big Essengue fan, as you can probably tell.
Dropped 22 and 14 on Sunday, I think it was, in game one of the semifinals there in the BBL. And he's an interesting guy, I feel like, because I feel like people see his, length, all of his measurables, the things that he's been able to do, how raw he is. And that points to upside for them. Like a lot of Nets fans think like this is the upside swing. We go for Essengue. He could really pop. And I feel like that's true, but also his ability to produce at this level, without really an elite skill right now, that kind of lends me to believe that he could have a high floor as well, just because of some of the things that he's able to do without having, the consistent jump shot, without having, with the handle being raw. Obviously, it's going to be a huge step up in competition in terms of athleticism, physicality, all that. But how do you feel about his floor, in terms of just what he'd be able to be? Or is there a player in the NBA who you could kind of see as a model for his archetype and how he could grow into the league?
I don't have a current player, but I have two former players. One is Shawn Marion, because Shawn, if you remember, Shawn could get you 15 to 17 to 19 points per game without a single play being ran for him, whether it was a timely cut to the rim, in transition, offensive rebounding. I mean, Shawn Marion was like the first small ball four, like Phoenix, that those Mike D'Antoni teams where they played small with Amari Stoudemire at the 5 and Marion at the 4. It looked crazy at the time, but they had some success. Didn't win a championship, but they had some success. And then Marion ended up winning a championship with the Mavs. That's like this guy that can defend all over the floor. He can rebound. He'll finish in transition. He'll just get you points without you having to run an offense for him. Doesn't need to pound the ball to be effective. So that's one of the things I like about Essengue. And then on the defensive end, even if he is Shawn Marion on defense, you take that. That's a win. But on the defensive end, I think he could be like Tayshaun Prince. Long, thin, sometimes being skinny works in his favor because he can chase guys around screens and so on. So if he ends up being a combination of Shawn Marion and Tayshaun Prince, I think that's a win. I think that's worthy of a top 10 pick. And he still has a ways to go as a shooter, but he's improving as a shooter. So those are the first two names that came to mind when I really started studying his game.
Yeah, one thing I've really liked about him, and I think that bodes well, it's a good indicator, is he's just a foul drawing machine. Like I think he's above 7 free throws per 36 minutes right now. And I think he struggled a little bit, in prior seasons, but he's above, I think he's like 72% right now from the free throw line. So that's a good indicator, just being able to draw fouls like that, at this early stage in his development. And it seems like the ceiling, like so many other guys I just talked about, fears, the shooting is going to be a swing skill. But, if you had to describe to, Nets fans what his role could be offensively, and what you envision for him, because it seems like right now, he's done a lot of short roll stuff. He's been a guy who can go in transition. There is some self-creation, but how do you feel about how he projects into an offense at the next level?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the free throw shooting. And most guys that rack up foul shots or attempts to the free throw line are ball dominant. Mm-hmm. This is what makes him unique, is that he's getting to the line, but he's not like your primary ball handler. They're not running plays for him in isolation and saying, go get us a bucket. He's just getting to the line off activity. So how that could translate to the NBA is you could have a guy that he may not be your number one option. He may not be the man, but he can complement the man and he can impact the game, whether it's getting the other team's bigs in foul trouble and so on. So I think that the way it could translate for the Nets is I imagine they're going to be a team that wants to get up and down the floor, and that's what he does best. But it's the defensive upside, and he's, I think, a good foundation piece to when they get that A1 or that franchise guy.
And the knock on him, it seems to be at this point in his development, I guess you could say free throw drawing is a skill, but he doesn't really have an elite skill right now in terms of the shooting, the handle, the defensive potential there, but it's raw. And when you talk about the Nets potentially picking him at 8, there are going to be guys there who do have that elite skill, who played obviously in college. So when you're looking at some of the other potential guys that would be available, like, would you take him ahead of, for example, a player like Khaman Maluach, who is an elite 3-point shooter and has some other areas of his game? Obviously, the upside might not be as high because of the athletic profile and some of the other things. But would you be comfortable betting on what Essengue has over maybe a safer floor prospect such as him?
Yeah, the Nets have 4 first-round picks. There's no need to play it safe, especially in the lottery. I think when you're in the Nets position, you can swing for the fences. You can go with the guy that you say, if he hits, if he maximizes his potential, he'll be this. I think Khan is really good. I think Khan is going to be a really good, complementary piece and floor spacer and maybe secondary ball handler and ball mover. But I think that, again, he's safe. And I think Essengue has a higher upside on both ends of the floor.
Gotcha.
But you have to trust your player development. Like, if you really believe in your developmental staff that you can add to Essengue's game, and if you believe in Noah's work ethic, then you go with Essengue, in my opinion.
Coming up next to close out the show, we'll talk about some other prospects the Nets could target at 8 and potentially some mid to late round sleepers that fans should have their eyes on. NBA fans, you know what time it is. Playoff season means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player drops 50 or more points in a playoff game, Dash Pass members score a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use the code WINGSTOP50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, and totally free. Offer valid noon to midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Look, guys, maybe you're ordering delivery a lot. It's starting to add up. You ever look at those fees and wonder, there's got to be a better way. With Dash Pass, you get $0 delivery fees and exclusive perks like this one. How much could you save over the season? Quite a lot. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass to unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When any player scores 50 plus in a playoff game, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tenders combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 order and code WINGSTOP50. That's Dash Pass. Your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Coming back from the break, talking with Raphael Barlow about some of the prospects that the Nets could potentially target at 8. We talked about Jeremiah Fears. He mentioned Noa Essengue as a player who I think there is a realistic chance could be available at 8, and the Nets could look to target and take a swing on upside. Anybody else who think, when you look at the way that you have mock drafts or you envision the board shaking out, that is a realistic guy for the Nets to be able to get at 8 without having to trade up?
I mean, I think if Khaman Maluach happens to fall, I would definitely pick him. Raw, but he's definitely an upside swing, massive interior presence, good defender. Not as great of a defender as some people have made him out to be, especially if you just look at the block numbers, but he's a late bloomer, started playing late. This was really his first year playing against really, really high level competition. And no disrespect to the BAL, but this was a test for him. This was a real test for him. I thought he played well. And if you believe in the upside in the shooting, which there has been some flashes of it, we didn't see a lot of it at Duke, but we saw some shooting in the Basketball Africa League. I think he made a couple 3-pointers when he played for the South Sudanese national team. We'll definitely want to get that correct, 2 different countries. And then in some of the just drills that I've seen from pro days and stuff, the touch is there. And I think for him, the Nets with their timeline have the opportunity to give him the opportunity to shoot threes if he were available. I know there's a lot of comparisons between him and Derik Lively, and Lively's been good for Dallas. I was a big fan of Lively going to the Mavs. I thought he fit exactly what they needed. Because the Mavs are in win now mode, Lively hasn't had the opportunity to really shoot threes. And I think Lively can shoot threes. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. But I think Maluach is in a situation where he may not have like the Luka Doncic that's going to get him those easy looks like Lively had. But I do think that if he puts it all together, we're talking about a defensive anchor, a vertical lob threat, and a floor spacer. And when you look at the NBA, there's not too many guys that fit all three categories. And I think Maluach has the potential to be able to do all three.
It seems like some people have, not really given much credence to or dismissed him as a potential floor spacer because, they didn't see him do it at Duke. There were numbers from Basketball Africa before that were encouraging. And he had a hand or a wrist injury this year where he said he was wearing a glove or whatever, right? And I think that would be something that affected his shooting, I would assume, right?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't affect him around the rim. He's like, 77, 78% from the floor.
A lot of dunks. Yeah,
a lot of dunks. A lot of just easy looks from Khaman. But I think from an upside standpoint, I get why some people may be a little bit hesitant because if you just look at the raw numbers, but I think from an upside standpoint, like I said, if he's able to hit on all three of those categories, rim protection, floor spacing, and being a vertical lob threat, that's a really, really good foundational piece.
And, there's another center in this draft who I find fascinating. It's Derik Queen from Maryland, a player who seemed like he might have been a lock in the top 10. And then the combine comes around and he puts up some historically low testing numbers. And it seems like a lot of big boards and mock drafts have him dropping into, the teens even potentially. But he's a guy who it seems like the upside in terms of what he brings as a driver of the basketball, the playmaking flashes, some of what you've seen there are extremely enticing. There's obviously questions about the defense and how some of the other things could come together. But where are you at, on Queen and him as a potential target, with the 8th pick?
Yeah, I think Queen is a lottery pick. I think the combine is good for some guys, and for some guys, it's just not a good setting. So think of it this way. If Nikola Jokic was at the combine, his numbers would probably be somewhere around Queen's. It's just he's not a guy that's going to wow you with athleticism and the shuttle drill and all that type of stuff. But you put 9 other players on the court, put the ball in his hands, he's going to make something happen. I think that's Derik Queen. I really think that Derik Queen's game should be measured in 5-on-5 settings and not in a combine and athletic testings. And I was at the combine, and the numbers were pretty bad.
I was there too, and I was looking at about that Jumbotron and Wintrust and every category that would swipe through. All right, wait for the end for Queen. So I was like, this is tough for him. But it's interesting also because I talked to him at the player media availability, and I asked him, is there a player like your unique skill set? Is there a player you could see yourself as a little bit, of forming yourself in that mold? And he might be a smart kid because of what you just said. He said Jokic, and that's not a bad guy. You don't want to compare yourself to Jokic, but it's like he was like, we're both a little grounded. So he's trying to put it in the head of some people. I can ball at, with this limited athleticism. Obviously, he's a little smaller than Jokic, but I think he's interesting because if you're talking about him, his driving ability, the things he's able to do to drive offense, if you're talking about him potentially being a hub in the half court, Jordi Fernandez has coached guys like Nikola Jokic, like Domantas Sabonis. And if Queen's going to be a hub in the half court, there's going to be shooting. Obviously, that would help him there, but more so his passing as a driver. And the assist to turnover numbers weren't great at Maryland, but he did throw and complete just some ridiculous passes. And there's vision there that is unique. So where are you at, in his passing ability and his ability to be a legit, efficient playmaker?
I'm a believer in it. I mean, maybe he's not Jokic, but what if he's Alperen Şengün? Şengün was an all-star. I think he was picked right outside of the lottery. If I'm not mistaken, he was selected by OKC and traded. But I've always liked Şengün. I lived in Turkey, so I had a chance to watch Şengün before he really, really blew up. And I was telling people that I thought Şengün was going to be like the modern version of Al Jefferson, but he was a little bit more skilled than even I anticipated. And I think Queen is a guy that he can pass. I think the shooting is going to be there. I don't think we saw the best of him at Maryland, but I think once he gets to an NBA team and maybe, he played in a double big situation at Maryland. So maybe if he's playing the 5 and there's some floor spacing, we can see a little bit more of the passing.
If those 3 guys that we touched on already were there, Khan, Essengue, Queen, who would you go with at 8?
Khan, Essengue, and Queen. I would go with Noah. I mean, you have 3 other picks.
Yeah.
And then, I think I would go with Noa Essengue.
A couple of more things I want to touch on before we close this out. I got to give you, I got to clear out and let you cook on Tre Johnson a little bit right now, because I know that you're a big Tre Johnson guy. And I'm not sure how realistic it is that he gets to 8, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities. And he's a guy who you seem to be really high on. So what do you love so much about his game?
Yeah, man, the SEC was tough. Like I mentioned with Jeremiah Fears, he led the SEC in scoring, 19 a game. I can't say that he had like really good playmaking around him. Shot 39% from 3 on 6 attempts per game. And when you look at those 6 attempts per game, a lot of those were just self-created threes or heavily contested threes. He's a much, much better passer than he's given credit for. I posted a tweet a few months back saying that basically the same thing, that Tre's a lot better passer than people think. He's kind of been unfairly compared to Cam Thomas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's more to his game than Cam Thomas. And if you just look at his film and you just take a real deep dive, he can hit the lob man, he can hit the skip pass, he can hit the roll man, he passes the ball ahead in transition. So maybe he's Devin Booker. And if you look at Devin Booker's old scouting reports, there were concerns about, does he pressure the rim enough? He was just considered just a shooter. And I think Tre is a good shooter, very good shooter, but I think there's more to his game than being a shooter. And I think he's just been unfairly boxed in as like this selfish guy that just wants to get buckets.
Do you see a scenario where he could fall to 8?
Yeah. I think everything is on the table. I'm not for sure if he gets past Utah at 5 because he kind of fits what they need, but you just never know. I mean, there was a draft where Patrick Williams went really, really high, and then that just kind of led other people to fall. So I think there's a shot, but also the Nets could move up if that's someone who they really like. And
to round this out, the Nets, we focused on 8. The Nets have 19. They have 26. They have 27. They could trade up from 19. I did an episode with some reports about them potentially trying to get up to 9 or 10. But focusing on the mid to late rounds, any prospect, mid, late lottery, early 20s guys that you're higher on than consensus who you think could be steals for the Nets potentially at 19?
Yeah, hear me out. You may think I'm crazy, but that's okay. If I'm the Brooklyn Nets, I am not leaving the draft without Hanson Yang.
Okay.
I'm not leaving without Hanson Yang. I know that there's some people that are a little skeptical. I've been a big Hanson Yang believer for a couple years now. And I was at the Combine and I talked to some teams and they were like, I didn't like him on film. I didn't like him, but I have a different perspective of him seeing him in person. Yang is a phenomenal passer, massive interior presence, very skilled around the rim, soft touch. He rebounds. He even hit a 3, maybe a 3 or 2 at the Combine. And he put up solid numbers at the Combine as far as just like in 5-on-5 play. And he did it without a point guard. There were plenty of times where they missed him on the roll. They missed him when he had a mismatch, when he had a guard on him. And if he got the ball in the back around the basket, it was automatic. Yes, he's going to have to adjust to the speed of the game. I even say this because I lived in China, that it takes a long time to get adjusted to the time zone and just get your body clock right. So I think that's still something that he was adjusting to and is probably still adjusting to. So I think with Hanson Yang, he's, like I said, very skilled around the block. I mean, very skilled. If you can go back and look at his film from the FIBA, I think it was U18s a few years ago, Alex Sarr didn't want anything with him. Ethan Almanza, who was a guy that was a lot of people thought was a projected first round pick, he didn't want anything with Yang. Yang gave US some issues. And I think with NBA floor spacing and a point guard that can get him the ball, I think he's going to be a tough matchup. May not be a guy that can close games for you, but I don't see a reason why he can't do what Zach Edey did. Not as big as Edey, close, but I think he's more skilled. Edey just kind of has like one move, just, the drop step or the short hook. Yang has post work and is a better passer. So I'm a big Hanson Yang fan. If I'm the Nets, you got a lot of picks. You can swing for the fences, and Hanson Yang is a guy that would be in the Nets uniform if it were up to me.
What's considered his range right now in the draft? Like, where is he at?
No idea.
No idea. Okay.
Yeah, because he's so polarizing. Like I've had people tell me he's a first round pick, like at the combine. I've had agents tell me, like, prior to like the draft, they were like, if we could just get our hands on him, we think he's a first round guy. He ended up signing with Clutch, which, depending on how you feel about Clutch, but the fact that they, decided to bring him in, it's not like the traditional guy that they would have in their camp. They must like him. And I don't know his draft range. I've heard some people like him in the first round. I've heard some people think that he's a second round pick. I've heard some people don't know if he'll get drafted, but most of the people that I've spoken with, and they knew that I was high on him prior to the combine, told me that seeing him in person, they got a totally, totally different view of him and a better understanding of what he can be and who he is as a prospect.
Yeah, he was hooping in the scrimmages at the combine. I saw, I got to watch a little bit of him playing there, and he did a lot of things. And offensively, it looked like there was some versatility and some things that could be tapped into. And if you're talking about the Nets, who have an owner in Joe Tsai, who, if there is a Chinese prospect who comes through, he has ties to him usually and would be interested, it seems like. So Hansen Yang, definitely a player that I would keep an eye on if I were Nets fans, and a guy that I think you just gave a good descriptor of why he could be a guy that they could swing on maybe later in the first round or into the second round. But I appreciate you taking the time, Raphael. All you guys can find Raphael's work on the Locked On Big Board podcast. Also, his Substack. Go hit that up. He does a great job there. I appreciate you taking the time, man, and maybe we'll circle back closer to draft week.
Yeah, no problem. I'll be in Brooklyn for the draft, so maybe we can do something there.
That does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and thank you again to Raphael. Does such a great job over on Locked On NBA Big Board. Be sure to go check out his show if you haven't. For Nets fans, I think that's a must leading up to the draft. But be sure to like, comment, subscribe here on Locked On Nets on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.